Sorry for all the delays, but we're here now, and I'm here to welcome you to join episode 4 of our series, Three Women Hidden in Plain Sight. The three community presenters are Jan Enns, bringing us American architect Julia Morgan, Ana Maria Cobos, bringing Chilean singer, songwriter, activist Violeta Parra to life, and thirdly, Carol Novick with a synopsis of American comedian Mae West. So standing by also to welcome you is Cece Sloan, who produces the series. Cece?
Thank you, Estelle, and everyone else for your patience. Welcome, Zoom friends, for episode 4 of Three Women Hidden in Plain Sight. I'm glad you're here to help us belatedly acknowledge the women who, lacking role models, didn't change the world, but lived to see the world's changes during their prime. One of those changes was the women's movement, which resulted now in bookshelves filled with biographies of forgotten prominent women. Today results in tagging a dozen women so far for you here, sort of like a hide and seek. We reclaim them for another glimpse into how we knew them in the first place, and much more. Thanks for joining our hunt. And be sure to let us know if you enjoyed it. I hope you do by getting on chat. And oh yes, be on the lookout for our next meeting in November 17th. Thank you ever so much, and please enjoy.
Thank you, Cece. And now, without further ado, here's Jan Enns bringing us American architect Julia Morgan. Jan?
Good morning, everybody. Julia Morgan was an architect in California. She was the first woman architect to be licensed in California. Just imagine her sitting in her office, never thinking that she would meet William Randolph Hearst, newspaper magnate and businessman, and that she would build his $700 million dream house in San Simeon. More than 50 years after her death, she was given the American Institute of Architects' highest honor, the gold medal. She was the first woman to be so honored. Who is Julia Morgan, and why did it take her so long to be appreciated? She was raised in Oakland, California, to a wealthy family, and they used to go to the East Coast every year, and she had a cousin who was married to an architect, and Julia was fascinated by his work. He suggested that she might think about being an architect. By the time she graduated from high school, she had decided that that's what she was going to do. She enrolled in UC Berkeley. They didn't have an architecture program, so she entered the civil engineering program, and she was the only woman in her class. One of her teachers suggested that she had some talent and that she should consider going to France, to l'École des Beaux-Arts, which she did, even though they had never admitted a woman. She got into an atelier or studio with an architect in Paris. She was one of a class in her atelier of 10, the only female. She learned drawing. She became more proficient in French, and she also learned the metric system. On her third attempt, she was the first woman to be admitted into the program of architecture at l'École des Beaux-Arts. She finished the program in 3 years, which was practically unheard of. She came back to the United States, and she had saved her money, opened up an office in San Francisco. Some of her first clients were family and friends, and she built homes for them. In 1903, she was approached by Mills College, which is a girls' college in Oakland. They wanted her to build a bell tower. And she did. And she decided she was going to use reinforced concrete that was not done in the United States. It's not used before, but she had learned about it in France and felt that it would be an appropriate construction material because it would withstand an earthquake. In her office, she had a large staff, and they became a sort of family for her. She was a very frail and petite woman, but she had amazing physical strength and incredible stamina. She worked hard. She worked 16 hours a week. A day, 6 days a week. Her architecture practice was very client-centered, and that meant that she built the type of building that her client wanted. She didn't have a style, a signature style of her own, like Frank Lloyd Wright did. And because of that, many of her buildings are not recognized as hers. In 1906, there was an earthquake in San Francisco that demolished most of the city. Her bell tower in Oakland was unscathed. The owners of the Fairmont Hotel, which was almost completed in San Francisco, heard about her undamaged bell tower. And because their hotel's interior had been pretty much demolished, except for the outside granite shell, they asked her to rebuild the interior structure of the 600-room hotel in a year, which she did. And it really made her much more recognized as an architect. Several years later, in 1913, Phoebe Hearst, William Randolph Hearst's mother, approached her, wanting her to build a conference center for the YWCA on 30 acres that she had south of Monterey in Pacific Grove. It's called Asilomar. Julia Morgan built 16 structures, all of natural materials so that they fit very well into the landscape. After Phoebe's death a few years later, William Randolph Hearst came to Julia Morgan saying that he had inherited all of the property and he had 250,000 acres about 200 miles south of San Francisco on the ocean, and he wanted her to build a small vacation home. It soon became evident, because of his large art collection, that he needed something far bigger and wanted something much more grand. He had acquired several walls and ceilings and other large artifacts around the world. And it was Julia's job as the designer, the architect, and the engineer to incorporate all of those into a cohesive building, which is now known as Hearst Castle. The 127-acre plot that he chose on the hill did not have any water. Eventually, Julia found water in the hills behind and above the site. She designed and devised a gravity flow water system to bring water down to the site and to provide water for the whole estate. And it's still used today. On the site, beside Hearst Castle, there are 3 very large guest cottages and 2 pools, an indoor pool and an outdoor pool, which are very considered to be amazing feats of engineering. Hearst was a very difficult client. He was constantly changing his mind after he told her to do something. She had designed a very large fireplace in one of the rooms with a 30-foot ceiling. He decided he wanted it on another wall. So she took it out, part of the ceiling, part of the wall, put it on the other wall. Then he decided he wanted it back where it originally was. She was very patient with him. During her work on San Simeon, she had to have surgery for an inner ear problem that she'd had since her childhood. She had her mastoid bone removed, and it greatly affected her balance. She continued to climb ladders and walk on scaffolding, holding the pocket of the man in front of her. Julia had never accepted the limitations of society, and doing all that climbing on her sites. The fashion of the day was long skirts, but she would always wear a pair of men's trousers underneath her clothing when she was on site. At the same time she was designing San Simeon, Hearst Castle, she designed another property for William Randolph Hearst called Windtoon, which was supposed to be fairly large, but it was the time just before the Depression, and he had to scale it down. It's about 200 miles north of San Francisco, near Mount Shasta. She designed a small Bavarian village with built interesting buildings in the old architecture of Germany or Austria. They have fanciful names and they have beautiful paintings on them. She spent 3 weekends on site at San Simeon. That required her to take 3 weekends a month. That required her to take an 8-hour train ride. She would leave Friday afternoon. She would sit on the upper berth and do work. She would arrive in San Luis Obispo and take a 50-mile taxi ride back up to San Simeon, work all weekend, reverse the trip on Sunday night, and go into work on Monday. In her work on San Simeon, she made 558 of those weekend trips. The fourth weekend of each month, she spent on site at Windtoon, north of San Francisco. Now we understand why she never married or had time for a relationship. Her whole life was devoted to architecture. She was considered to be a quiet feminist. She hired many women to work in her office that she trained. And if they had particular talent, she would pay for their tuition. She believed that there should be more women in every profession. She had a 47-year career. She was considered to be very prolific and very innovative. She designed and built over 700 structures in her career. It's an average of 15 a year. At the time, most other architects were only building 2 or 3 a year. She was very modest about her work. She shunned publicity, never gave interviews, and her very favorite saying was, "My buildings will be my legacy. They will speak for me long after I'm gone." And I believe that they have. Thank you. I'm going to try seeing if I can show some of the slides that I have. This is a picture of the estate,
San Simeon.
127 acres. This is Julia Morgan when she was in Paris, and this is when she was in high school. This is her bell tower that is still standing after more than 100 years. This is a picture of some of the damage on the inside of the Fairmont Hotel that she had to reconstruct.
Oh my.
This is the completed Fairmont Hotel as it stands today. This is one of the stone and wood buildings at Asilomar in Pacific Grove. made out of natural materials. Here's another one. Here's the main house. It has 42 bedrooms and 116 rooms, I think, in just this house. This is the pool that she had to redo 3 times so that he could incorporate the Roman temple around it. This is the interior pool. And this is one of the buildings in Windtoon, which can have the beautiful murals on them. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jan. Excuse me, I'm glad you got to show your slides. And now we'll move on to Ana Maria Cobos, who will tell us about Chilean singer, songwriter, activist, Violeta Parra.
Good morning. I'm going to start with a quote. My name is Violeta Parra, though I'm not quite sure. I've been fighting a strong wind for 50 years. I've been doled a bitter and dry life. But that's life really, a hullabaloo that no one understands. Winter has entered the deepest parts of my soul, and I doubt that spring is anywhere. I do nothing at all, not even sweeping. I don't want to see anything anymore. I put the bed in front of my door and I leave. Violeta Parra was a Chilean musician, an ethnomusicologist, a singer-songwriter, a folklorist. She was a visual artist. She painted, she made tapestries or arpilleras. She made clay and wire sculptures. She was also a poet. She believed in the worthiness of the art and music of the common people. Violeta compiled, recorded, composed, and elevated Chilean folk art and music. National and international audiences learned about Chilean folk music and art as a result of the skills she learned and applied with her unwavering dedication. I'm going to do a screen share. Here she is. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. A little bit about her life. She was born in 1917 in a small town in the foothills of the Andes. Later, she lived in the capital, and even later, she spent over 3 years in Europe during 2 different trips. She stems from a humble itinerant family. Her father was a music school teacher. He died when she was 10, leaving her mother, a dressmaker, to raise the whole family literally on her own. Of Violeta's 7 siblings, several became artists, poets, and musicians. Her older brother, Nicanor, became a nationally and internationally recognized poet. Nicanor inspired Allen Ginsberg. Violeta flouted convention. She dressed simply. She had a scarred face from measles. She did not wear makeup. She said that she was the ugliest woman in the world. Violeta had little formal education, no training in music or art. She was a self-taught musician and artist. She was surrounded by music and folk art. Her talents developed in this environment, and by age 9, she had learned to play the guitar on her own. At 10, she performed in a circus to help mother make ends meet. And from 12 on, she wrote poetry, and wrote her own songs. In Santiago, she performed in bars and in poor neighborhoods. Violeta developed an interest in learning and recording folk songs. She traveled the length of Chile with a tape recorder, connecting with folk singers to write the lyrics and record their songs. She married twice, first in 1938, had 2 children, a boy and a girl, Isabel and Angel, 2 more girls from the second marriage. The youngest daughter died in infancy while she was traveling. Violeta had a few tragic love affairs, and when she was 43, she fell madly in love with the Swiss musician Gilbert Favre, 18 years younger. She suffered from poor health most of her life. Violeta's entire life is characterized by economic and social struggles. Violeta shot herself at age 49 in February 1967. This was her second attempt. Background to her achievements. In the 1940s, there's a worldwide folk music revival. Woody Guthrie and others in the US, for example. So Violeta's working in this context. Her work propels the protest song movement of the late 50s and 60s in Chile and throughout Latin America. Despite little formal education, despite class and gender barriers in Chile and abroad, with her strong personality and steadfast determination, she succeeds in using her own experiences and effectively accesses whatever resources are available to make extraordinary accomplishments. Her itinerant and restless background serve her well, as she's constantly seeking to secure a living. In Chile, her interest in folklore and social justice offered an alternative to mass consumer culture. She reinvigorates the Chilean folk culture movement, taking it from the countryside to Santiago and beyond. Later, her success in Europe enhances her recognition and artistic efforts back home. Her national experiences. She's recognized as one of the first historians of Chilean folk culture. Her work is inspired by two contemporary women who, unlike her, have the advantage of formal academic training. These two women are Margot Loyola and Teresa Vicuña, the first a folklorist and the second one a sculptor. Violeta quickly becomes savvy and learns to work with the academy and music industry. In the early 50s, her brother Nicanor encourages her to compile and record folk songs and local customs. She travels the length of Chile to record and teach about Chile's popular culture. In 1949, she makes her first single recording, and this is followed by many more recordings, including several LPs in Chile and Europe. In 1955, she has a radio program, Así Canta Violeta Parra, Thus Sings Violeta Parra, for which she received a national award. In 1958, she founds the National Museum of Chilean Folk Art. In 1959, she publishes a book about Chile's folklore. Twice, while ailing from hepatitis, she spends several months in bed, but she uses the time to learn to make arbilleras or tapestries and also to begin working with clay. International experiences. As I said, she's had two trips to Europe. The first one was from 1955-56. She was invited to go to Poland to the International Youth Festival. From there, she went on to France and other European countries. It was while in Poland that she learned of the death of her youngest child. Though deeply depressed, she chose to press on with her travel plans. The second trip to Europe is from 1962 to 65. She goes to Finland, Germany, the Soviet Union, Switzerland. She goes with her daughter and son, Isabel and Angel. They perform in nightclubs in the Quartier Latin, the Latin Quarter. During this trip, she makes recordings in Paris for Chant du Monde, in London for the BBC, in Geneva for UNESCO. Now I'm going to show you the second slide, which is the recording that Alan Lomax made of her for the BBC in London in 1956. This is on YouTube. These multiple successes secure her a solo exhibit at the Musée d'Art Décoratif, part of the Louvre. She is the first Latin American artist to exhibit individually her 26 paintings, sculptures, and 22 tapestries or arpilleras. The exhibit is from April 8th to May 11th, 1964. And I have a slide of that to show you, which I was able to secure directly from the museum in Paris. They sent me the original announcement. The next slide I'm going to show you is from that original show, and it is one of her arpilleras. Arpilleras are tapestries that are typically, this one she embroidered. Typically, they have pieces of fabric, and this one might, the purple on this one might be fabric. But what you see has a backing of burlap. Again, using what materials are available. Typically, women that didn't have many resources use the potato sacks, the burlap from potato sacks that they had left over in their homes. So that is one that was showed in that 1964 show. 33 years later, in 1997, the Louvre has an homage to Violeta Parra, and they show 15 of her tapestries, 30 of her paintings, and videos of her music. And I'm going to show you that. That was sent to me also by the museum in Paris, that they did this great big homage in 1997, whatever number of years that is after the original show. So now she returns to Chile with her family. So this is 1960s. She applies all of these experiences that she picked up in Europe. And with her son and daughter, Isabel and Angel, they popularized the Peña Folclórica, which is a meeting place of music and musicians. This became very, very popular in Chile when this was going on. Her legacy. More than anything else, Violeta was a survivor. She achieved extraordinary feats alongside never-ending hardship. She considered herself to be the ugliest woman in the world, yet became a successful promoter and innovator of Chilean folk music and art. Violeta taught her countrymen and women to be proud of their own culture and traditions, not to search beyond Chile's borders. Her children, Isabel and Angel, grandchildren, Tita and Javiera, and some of her great-grandchildren are renowned musicians today. She's considered to be the mother of the Chilean New Song movement, vitally important during the resistance against the Latin American dictatorships of the 1970s and 80s. She's considered to be among the best Chilean musicians ever. I'm going to show you a partial discography. This is some of the music that she recorded during her brief life. In 2006, the Violeta Parra Foundation went live, finally. Her family had started on this project in 1990 when democracy was restored in Chile. The objective of the foundation was to create a space to house all of her creation. I'm going to show you another slide of her museum. This is her museum. So the foundation, the goal of the foundation was to create this space, which was finally became real in 2015. This museum was inaugurated under President Bachelet, the first woman president of Chile. There are very, very moving videos on the site, and it's really worth going to see what this is all about. Her children were all there, and many other prominent people. In addition to everything I've showed you so far, there are plays, there are biographies, there's a biopic, a TV series. There are many books, many articles, and numerous dissertations written about her. She has inspired fusion musical groups throughout Chile, Latin America, the US, and beyond. There are 13 new rock groups in Chile alone. In 2017, the centenary of her birth, a notebook, the Chilean National Council of Culture and Arts published a beautiful tribute to her. And I'm going to show you that. So this is a beautiful 162-page book that is available freely online. It's in its entirety, it's on PDF. Anyone interested can ask me for the information. Starting during the dictatorship, so this is already in the late 70s, early 80s, something spontaneous began to happen on her birthday. People started going to her tomb for her birthday to celebrate her and her life and everything that she did for her country. And this is my last slide. This is what happens at her tomb, and it's still going on. every year for her birthday, people show up and they go and celebrate her life with music, with food, with art. In closing, not quite yet, her daughter Isabel summarizes her mother's work. Like her arpilleras shown at the Louvre, she took the cultural material that was available to her and she made great things to show off her country's cultural riches. She fights against cultural stereotypes of Latin American culture and succeeds in creating authentic popular culture. Why did she commit suicide? The most frequent explanation is the failed love affair with Gilbert Favre, the younger Swiss musician she made in her 40s. She always sought the stability of idealized love and yet never found it. Is it her own children's success or the success of the Chilean new song led by a younger generation? Did she feel she lost control of what she had started? Did she feel her age? Did youth culture defeat her? Or did she tire of the never-ending financial and other struggles? At the end, she was living in a tent with minimal comforts. As successful as Violeta was while she lived, in death, her influence and legacy are boundless. Violeta is like the proverbial pebble that drops in the water and creates ripples, ripples, and more ripples. Her most famous song, Gracias a la Vida, Thanks to Life, was written in Bolivia, where she went looking for her Swiss love. Sung in her own voice, this song has over 10 million views in YouTube. Violeta's Gracias a la Vida is also interpreted by many Latin American musicians, young and old, all over the Latin America, Europe, and in the US. And now I'll play a clip of that song. I don't know if I did that.
Yes.
I did?
Fine.
Okay.
Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me dio dos luceros que cuando los abro perfecto distingo lo negro del blanco. Y en el alto cielo su fondo estrellado, en las multitudes el hombre que yo amo. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado el oído.
In closing, during her 1964 exhibition at the Louvre, an interviewer asks Violeta, or says to Violeta, "You paint, you make arpilleras, you make sculpture. If you had to choose a single form of expression, what would it be?" She answers in French, "I would choose to stay with the people." Violeta is present in spirit, in song, in art, and stands by the side of the hundreds of thousands. One day last year, it was over 1 million of protesters that rose up in October of 2019, demanding dignity and social justice. Violeta will be by their side when they go to the polls this October 25th in Chile to vote for a new constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ana Maria, for that wonderful, informative talk. Now we're going to turn to Carol Novick with a synopsis of American comedian Mae West. Carol?
Thank you. Mae West was not only a comedian, she was an American actress, singer, playwright, screenwriter, and sex symbol whose entertainment career spanned 7 decades. She was known for her bawdy and breezy sexual independence. She was the most controversial sex siren of her time, the queen of double entendres, often on screen. Her most quoted line was, "Is that a gun in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?" Mary Jane West was born in August of 1893 in Brooklyn. By the age of 3, she was mimicking family and friends, and she learned quickly about the power of commanding an audience. By shot 5, she was entertaining at church socials and starting to appear in amateur shows. Her mother, Tilly, encouraged this by taking her daughter to dance lessons, plays, and vaudeville performances. One actor stood out for her, African-American entertainer Bert Williams. From his performances, she learned the art of innuendo and double entendre, which he used to mask his satire on race relations. She began performing professionally in vaudeville at age 14, her mother doing all the costumes and contracts, but seemingly unconcerned about young May's exposure to the seamier side of the business. May spent the next few years transforming herself from a sweet little thing to a bold young woman. Around 1910, her mother introduced her to Frank Wallace, an up-and-coming song and dance man. She thought this might boost May's career, and indeed they formed an act and went on the burlesque circuit in the Midwest, far from the supervision of her mother. Having affairs with several other male cast members, she was counseled by an older cast member that marriage would offer her protection against pregnancy and being alone. May lied about her age. She was 17, and she and Frank were married. Returning to New York that summer, she broke up both the act and the marriage. She auditioned for and got the part in her first Broadway show, A Comedy Review. To increase her stage presence, because she was only 5 feet tall, she had special shoes made for herself that were somewhere between 7 and 9 inches tall. To wear them, she had to glide across the stage, and this glide became part of her trademark. The show quickly folded, but 2 Broadway impresarios had seen her and cast her in a new production starring Al Jolson. In August of 1913, she met Guido Diro, a vaudeville headliner. They began a passionate affair and may have married in 1914. West aborted his child on the advice of her mother. The procedure nearly killed her and left her barren. West later said, "Marriage is a great institution. I'm not ready for an institution." West finally got her break in a review opposite Ed Wynn. Her character Mamie danced the shimmy, and her photograph appeared on an edition of the sheet music. As more parts came her way, West began to shape her character, often rewriting dialogue to better suit her persona. She began writing her own plays using the pen name Jane Mast. Her first starring role on Broadway was in a 1926 play that she had written, directed, and produced. It was called Sex. Conservative critics panned the show, but ticket sales were strong. The city officials, though, had received so many complaints that they raided the theater, and she was arrested along with the cast and sentenced to 10 days for corrupting the morals of youth. Though West could have paid a fine and been let off, she chose the jail sentence for the publicity it would garner. The media crowned her the darling bad girl who had climbed the ladder of success wrong by wrong. Her next play dealt with homosexuality, but it never opened on Broadway due to the efforts of the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice. In 1920, she was an early supporter of gay rights and publicly declared against police brutality that gay men experienced. She was also an early supporter of the women's liberation movement. She continued to write plays with subject matter which was rather adult and arousing controversy. On several occasions, the actors would have to learn 2 scripts, one for the general audience and one a more refined version for the times when they were tipped off that vice agents might be in the audience. In 1928, she brought out her film Diamond Lil, and it was a Broadway hit that cemented her image in the public eye. She revived it many times. Hollywood took notice, and in 1932, at age 38, she was offered a contract by Paramount Pictures. She made her first film with George Raft in Night After Night. she was allowed to rewrite her scenes, and she did. The first one showed her with a hat check girl, and the young girl says, "Goodness, what beautiful diamonds." And West replies, "Goodness had nothing to do with it, dearie." Reflecting on the results of the rewritten scenes, Raft is said to have remarked, "She stole everything but the cameras." Her next two films she did with Cary Grant, whom she claims to have discovered. The first one got a nomination for an Academy Award and for Best Picture. And the second one, I'm No Angel, garnered her so much attention that references to her were everywhere, including song lyrics of Cole Porter, the WPA mural in Coit Tower, a Betty Boop cartoon, and a painting by Frida Kahlo. Even William Randolph Hearst asked her to his house, and she said, "I could have married him, but I got no time for parties." Incidentally, she was the second highest paid person in the United States in 1935 next to him. He was the most highly paid. By that time, the Hays Code, or the Production Code, which had the power to pre-approve films and change scripts, began to be seriously enforced, and hers were edited very heavily. One of the bad productions was Belle of the 90s, but in it the studio hired Duke Ellington and his orchestra to accompany her. May always tried to give a leg up to her black friends where possible. Klondike Annie followed. It dealt with religion and hypocrisy. It may have been her magnum opus, but here again, Hearst was upset with her because she had made some unkind remarks about Marion Davies, his mistress, and he sent a note to all his editors to not accept any advertising for this picture. It was filthy. Paramount tried to tone her down. Surprisingly, because in her movies, there was no profanity, there was no nudity, and very little violence, quite different from today's films. She was also put on a box office poison list along with Greta Garbo, Joan Crawford, Marlene Dietrich, and Fred Astaire, because theaters were having such a difficult time, the production companies were having such a hard time selling her films. She did succeed with W.C. Fields, though, in My Little Chickadee in 1940, a huge hit. But she was condemned for her negative role, and such lines as, "When I'm caught between two evils, I generally take the one I never tried." As the 30s was coming to an end, so was May's movie career, and she moved on to other things. She decided she needed to avoid the censors. So she went on to top nightclubs in New York and Las Vegas, and national theaters in New York, Broadway, London. She was allowed here to be herself, and she came up with one wonderful role that Catherine Was Great, which she penned as a spoof on Catherine the Great, surrounding herself with an imperial guard of tall, muscular young actors. In the 50s, she starred in her own Las Vegas stage show at the newly opened Sahara Hotel, singing while surrounded by oiled bodybuilders. The show stood Las Vegas on its head. "Men come to see me, but I also give the women something to see. Wall-to-wall men," she said. At this time, she also wrote 3 books. She did 5 record albums. And finally, 27 years later, she appeared in 2 more films. The first by Gore Vidal, Myra Breckinridge, which was intended to be a campy sex change comedy, but had serious production problems, resulting in a botched film and box office failure. However, the cult film circuit loved it, and she was dubbed the Queen of Camp. In 1971, the student body of UCLA voted Mae West the Lady of the Century in honor of her relevance as a pioneering advocate of sexual frankness and courageous crusader against censorship. And her last film was done at age 85. Again, there were production problems and the film was a disaster. Let's see. She became romantically involved at age 61 with Paul Novat, one of the muscle men in her Las Vegas show, and 30 years her junior. Their romance continued until her death at age 87. He once commented, "I believe I was put on this earth to take care of Miss West." For her contribution to the film industry, she got a star on Hollywood Walk of Fame. For her contribution as a stage actor, she was inducted into the American Hall of Fame, Theater Hall of Fame. She had firmly refused the photographs to be photographed in the nude. Her image was unforgettable, with an hourglass shape, thought to be the inspiration for the Coca-Cola bottle. Covered with furs and diamonds and feathers, her hand on her hip, the husky Brooklyn accent. She was painted by Dali, admired by George Bernard Shaw, photographed by Avedon, praised by critics, damned by censors, and loved by the audiences. She was very savvy about marketing herself. She didn't suffer from shame or embarrassment and never apologized for who she was. She created her character and lived it too. She pushed the envelope in so many different ways. She paved the way for many future stars and for women in general, encouraging us to stand strong and be ourselves.
Thank you, Carol, for that informative and entertaining presentation. And now for the last word, our leader, Cece Sloan.
Hello, all, and I have just so much fun choosing the women to pull out of hidden, where are they? They're hidden away somewhere. But to be able to have them come to life by, well, thank you, Estelle D'Annunzio. Thank you, Jan Enns. Thank you, Ana Maria Cobos. And thank you very much, Carol Novick. And you all made the Zoom happen. And it's just wonderful seeing it all and hearing you all. You're all great. But most of all, I want to thank the amazing Joan Milliman, who puts it all together and takes away the pressure from all of us.
Including me.
My pleasure.
Really wonderful.
And come back again next month. We'll be here, I believe it's November 17th, also a Thursday at 11 o'clock. And there are several chats. Let's see, very interesting. And gracias, Ana Maria, and marvelous. So there you go. Thanks.
Stacey, it's November 19th is the Thursday.
Okay,
That's
thank
right.
you. Correction, November 19th. Listen, guys, enjoy your lunch. And thank you all very, very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Cece.
you, Cece.
Thank you, Cece.
Thank you, Cece.
Thank you.